All set? All set? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Nantucket Finance Committee meeting for Thursday, May 15th. This meeting is called to order. I was negligent in bringing our name plaque, so I'll introduce everyone. On your left on the screen, that's Steve Morey, David Worth, Jim Kelly, Tim Savarino, John Tiffany, Cliff Williams, Craig Sperry. Christy Kickham will not be able to join us today. Is there any public comment that is not on our agenda today? Yes, ma'am. Could you step up to the microphone, please, and introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, gentlemen and ladies. I'm Lucille Jordan, and I was inspired to come and make just brief comments by what you wrote in the town warrant regarding Article 48. Right, yeah, Article 48.
Okay.
I am a resident of Naushop, and I attended many public hearings regarding the proposed development, which I understand there will be development. I'm very clear about that. Many of you know me. I have a background in real estate for many, many years. My concerns are with the infrastructure, because I believe that the development that will come our way will require very thoughtful infrastructure changes, including the possibility of access points off of Old South Road into Surfside, possibly, paving roads that are not presently paved, and creating access points off of Old South Road, maybe over to Milestone Road. And my request is that as we move forward with this project, that this is very thoroughly put forward, because there will be development. I'm very clear about that. Exactly what it will be, I'm not clear about that yet. But I am not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to, adding a turning lane, creating more access points. I just really want to know, as a resident in that area, that it will happen so that we don't have unreasonable congestion. And more than that, I look at Old South Road as kind of like the golden artery. People that fly into Nantucket, that's the main way they get into our town. And I think it's an important access point, and I'm merely inspired, as I said, by your comments that made me feel that there's some thoughtfulness and attention being paid to this, as both properties are large. Obviously, the former Glowacki property at almost 70 acres is quite substantial, and so it won't just be the possibility of two large stores. It'll be much more substantial than that. So I like being proactive. We heard that word yesterday in a lecture that several of us attended, and I think that this development, some form of it will happen, and we need to be thinking about how are we going to move people around. So, gentlemen, I appreciate the time. I know you have a busy agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other public comment today? Okay. All right, hearing none, we will go to the minutes that Martin sent around. There were two emails that were sent. One was May 1st, and the other was May 5th. So we'll start with the information sent on May 1st, and there are minutes that begin on February 13th. Did everybody have a chance to look over the minutes?
Minutes of February 13th?
Yeah, or actually overall, just in general.
Yep.
Okay. We could take these one meeting at a time, or we can take them more collectively, whatever the discretion is of the committee.
Well, I'd like to move.
I was just going to say, I'd like to move that we accept all the minutes.
All the minutes, okay. And that will be for February 13th, just to be sure we're all set.
Yeah,
The 18th, thank you.
and March 3rd.
And March 3rd. And there's more after that. So we're up to March
4th.
Okay, March 3rd, March 4th.
April 3rd? Oh, no, Steve, no.
Let's see, March 4th.
March 6th.
Yeah, March 6th. There. And warrant articles, let's just be sure. Okay, March 6th. Is everybody okay so far? We're not losing anyone besides me?
March 10th?
March 11th. Is there one for the 10th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Says the 10th.
10th. Okay. Monday the 10th?
Yes, correct.
All right, Monday the 10th and Tuesday the 11th. And then there's another email on March 5th, which, be sure, and then I think that's the April 3rd. Okay, then I can. There isn't one for April 3rd.
Yep, there's an-
There is, okay. All right.
The 1 PM and the 2 PM.
Oh, okay. Thank you, I missed that. Okay, I think that covers all of them. Any?
And April 6th, you got that one as well. That was in the last
Yeah.
email, I think, that got sent.
Okay, and April 6th. Okay. Okay. I went to an old list. Okay, great. So any questions on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
I think it's a technical thing on
Sure.
February 13th and February 18th.
Mm-hmm.
Under the approval of prior minutes right at the top, it says
Yep.
January 28th, 2013. Is that?
Oh, it should be 2014.
Yeah. So it's the same on both
Okay.
Feb 13 and Feb 18.
So 13th, 18th, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So, Terry, do you hear that? Okay, so we'll make that change.
Yep, so you want to adopt them as amended. or
Yep.
approve them as amended.
Okay, so we have a
Those two.
Yeah, so we have a motion to approve all with those technical amendments. Any other comments? Or actually, is there a second on that motion? Let's go over that.
Second.
Second, thank you. All right, any other comments on any of the minutes? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, very good. That's out of the way, thank you. Committee reports. From my standpoint, there is nothing, but I will give an update on the search for finance director. I think that can fall under this category. The town is presently in the final stages of selecting a finance director. A committee was set up consisting of Mr. Atherton, Mr. Miller from the Board of Selectmen, Debbie Dilworth as the acting finance director, Libby Gibson, Greg Tivnan, Pat Paris, Amanda Johnson, and David Worth and myself from this committee, and spent a few days interviewing individuals and whittling down that list. And like I said, we're in the final stages, and hopefully within a week or so, a final decision will be arrived at. Okay, so that's about the only update I have. Any other committee reports? John?
Yeah, we're gonna, the capital program committee is gonna be meeting on the 11th of June,
Okay.
at 8:30 a.m. And we're hopefully at that point gonna finish off the financial part of the 10-year plan. So we didn't quite get to where we wanted to be with the meeting, so we're gonna finish it off at that point. I believe everything is all ready to go, and we just gotta go through it and make sure everybody's covered.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And then, excuse me.
Oh, yeah, Dave.
To John, how does it wend its way? Is that go to the selectmen?
It'll go here and then to the selectmen, I believe. That's where it's
Okay.
gonna go. It goes to the finance committee, then to the selectmen.
Always nice to be prepared.
So you'll hear about this.
Guess so. Guess we will. All right, very good. Okay. Moving on then to item 5, discussion of the fiscal year 2015 budget process, which is the one we just finished up, and the upcoming fiscal year 2016 budget cycle. And this is on the agenda really just to gauge the committee's feelings about how things went last year and any specific goals or items that concern members for the upcoming cycle. So I'll just open it up for anyone who'd like to make a comment and go from there. If everyone's satisfied, then John, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say that hopefully there's some thought being given is that, last year, we were without a finance director, and I'm on this committee, I'm also on the capital program committee. There's no question that Libby did a heck of a job in trying to plug that gap, but, things were late, and we all understood it. And my view is that hopefully there is somebody who is thinking about the fact that what if the same thing occurs this year? Somehow it's got to be done a little differently.
Okay, so no, Jim.
Maybe just following up on that, when the search is successful for a new finance director, I think it's important, after they're here a bit, for them to come to us and kind of lay out their plan for the budget process.
Okay.
And also where we can give them our input about what the relationship between the finance director and the FinCom, and how we're going to, how we're going to access information and timeliness, and just to kind of define the relationship like early on, rather than have this understanding for people making some assumption that, well, we always did it this way, and that person may not know that, and that kind of thing.
So once this new individual is in place as a finance director, one of the first things will be to, at our first meeting. Right, and that meeting. Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Clarify. So they may be
So
coming
that's
from
48 hours, right?
No, but they may be coming from a town, they may not come from Massachusetts, but if they are, so, I
Good.
think it's just important, so
No, I think that's a good idea, an orientation. That's a good suggestion. I will share that with the town manager. And go from there. Good. John? Yeah.
To tail onto that,
Yeah.
of course, my remark was based on the fact that if we get someone and hold someone, they're going to be new, and of course that still has some problems with it. And this is what Jim was alluding to. So I think that's something that if it's business as usual, I think we're probably going to be disappointed.
Okay. No, that's all good points. And I will talk to Mrs. Gibson about that, and we'll go from there. David?
I'd like to throw out and resurrect an idea that I talked about over a year ago, about maybe changing up the schedules on how we do things like our budget meetings. After having gone to the annual finance committee members and discovered that there are a few towns that run particularly their budget stuff on Saturdays, longer hours, so that they can get through more articles in shorter periods of time. And I'm having met all of the candidates, I actually can, Matt, I think, weigh in here, but I think we're likely to get a really pretty strong candidate, and that I think that perhaps now is the time to relook at some of the practices that we've had. Maybe streamline our process, continue to cover every single article. We have to do that, obviously, by law and charter, but to change those things up. Had a little bit of a discussion with Libby about the interest on the part of the town, or her part in doing something like this, and I think it's open. They would be open to have a discussion and come at a process that might work. Obviously, not something that we have to decide now, and I think should be done when we get a new finance director. But maybe move to something that streamlines the way we handle things and moves through our calendar year in a more dynamic and streamlined fashion. So.
One thing I will interject on that note. I think I haven't quantified it, but I believe that our meeting schedule this year is 6 less than the previous year. And one of the goals that I had was doing that, try to make our time more efficient. That was achieved with the public hearing for the citizen warrant articles by cutting down 2 meetings. And then I guess maybe the fortuitous timing of not having anything controversial is that we were able to eliminate 4 meetings in January and February. So I'd like to think we're on the right track. As for my position of changing things up, certainly, as long as I'm here, I'm open to looking at new ideas and seeing what the committee wants to do. I do believe that, just listening to this, is that the Board of Selectmen would and should have an input on this. And my only concern is that we keep the level of transparency so that citizens who are attending or who want to attend or are interested, that none of that gets lost in any kind of change. But anyway, other comments? Cliff, and then Craig?
Just kind of,
Hold on a second.
No, I'm concerned about the recording.
Oh, what's wrong?
To the mics. I don't know if the recording is on.
Oh, you can't hear me?
But no, I can hear you a little bit. I just know from our experience
Yep.
that if you're not speaking into the mics, for Mr. Kelly, for example, the mic is some distance away. And so I would encourage you to do that.
Go to Mike? Okay, thank you. Okay. That interrupt I'll take. Cliff?
here you go. Just several things, kind of a broad spectrum. When it comes to information, like we had the landfill issue, and then I kind of discovered through running for selectman the issue with the Sherman Commons, where I know there's been articles in the newspaper, but I'd rather get my information from either the selectmen or people who are directly involved in the issue. I think it was just not given enough time, considering the huge impact of what the landfill presented for the town. And, I was given 3 days or a weekend to figure it out. And then as running for selectman, I learned that there were different negotiations with the Sherman Commons, which I was kind of clueless about. And I was kind of getting beat up from every direction because I was in the Finance Committee. And
I can relate.
aren't you on the Finance Committee? And I go, yes, and what do you know? And I go, nothing. So
I can relate.
I was just hoping we could work together better, or give a heads up a little bit sooner.
Okay. Craig?
I would support what David's bringing up. I think the idea of having a Saturday, or however it works out, to have more citizen input, and the idea of becoming even more efficient. I was glad to hear there were 6 less meetings this year. I thought it was an amazing process, a lot of information. From being my first time through, I was impressed how organized things were and how things kept going, and we got it done, because initially it seemed like, oh my God, how's this all going to come together? And congratulations to the chair and the rest of the committee for
Not me, it's a committee.
making it work.
No comment.
And this might be an opportunity also for the new finance director to, depending on where they see things, to get involved in this process too. That it could help the whole budgeting process by having the input of the finance director with this other idea.
Okay, thank you. Any other further comments? Tim?
Well, I think it's a horrible idea. I think it's an absolute horrible idea. I think that if we want to encourage new people to think about coming on the Finance Committee, young folks with families, weekends are precious, soccer games, baseball games, recitals, whatever. I think it's worked well as far as the commitment on the Finance Committee's part for years and years, meeting weekdays after work, and I think we ought to stay with that. To streamline the process, if there's consultants or experts coming in, it means they're coming in on weekends. It's costing additional money for that. Our staff has to give up their weekends to come in. Citizens who might have young children or whatever have to give up their time with their families. I think it's a horrible idea, and I'm not sure that I'd like to be open about it, but I just can't imagine, other than streamlining the process, which I'm not sure that has a lot of merit, in the sense that I think our due diligence needs to be done thoughtfully. I can't get behind it, Dave. I apologize on that. And I think that to Cliff's point about, I was hoping, Mr. Chairman, the agenda was a little different so that we didn't have to take transfer time with our, for folks out here for just a quick bit of business. But I would like to pick up maybe later on in the meeting what Cliff said about, the Finance Committee actually being in the dark on some items, some members knowing what's going on, other members not. And I talked to Cliff about, when he mentioned this to me, that he was kind of blindsided over at Sherburne Commons during the election process, and I didn't know what to tell him. I've never been on a committee that wasn't all on the same page, so maybe we could pick that up at a future discussion.
We could. That's perfectly fine. In fact, if we can certainly pick that up on discussion of Finance Committee goals for going forward, and I think as part of the discussion, that's fine with me, if everyone's okay with that. That aside, how about that aside with the potential for moving how we schedule our meetings? Is there any other comments or feedback anyone has from this past budget process? Let's stick with that. So, other than having a finance director, were we satisfied with basically satisfied with how the process proceeded? Jim?
I'd just like to thank Martin for his very professional behavior, his timeliness, his very positive attitude in a time that I'm sure is very stressful. You would never know it. But I just want to personally thank him for that.
Mm-hmm. Martin, I thank you every day, don't I? No, thank you. Yes, Martin has certainly picked up the slack. There's no question about that. And in fact, actually, and so has the whole finance department. I think Martin would agree.
Yes, that is correct.
That is true.
Everybody just felt that
Really has. I would agree. Yeah, that's from my experience behind the scenes. I would echo that. Any other comments? Okay, so why don't then something else? Here, I'm sorry. Before I go there, and then the upcoming budget cycle. Well, we've already one suggestion for changing meetings. Any other ideas or suggestions on the fiscal year 2016 budget cycle? Okay. So right now, certainly the points made is when the new finance director starts to come in and have a meeting with us for a back and forth discussion and potential for changing how we meet. Other than that, we'll move along then. Okay. So hearing no other points, and why don't we go to the next item, which is discussion of reserves funds transfers. And the first one is from the Department of Public Works. And Kara, thank you for coming. Just an overview. This is a request for $50,000 for operating expenses. There is some notes that are due that cannot wait, and the idea is that this reserve fund transfer will help the department get through, and with the idea of paying back either us this year or the general fund for the next fiscal year. Okay. Am I summing that up? Yes. Okay. Floor is yours. Thank you.
As everyone knows, we had a pretty difficult winter, and you also know, our snow and ice budget is overspent. Snow and ice only covers the purchase of materials, the repair of vehicles, the staff overtime, the the equipment maintenance, grounds, and that kind of thing, all comes out of the DPW budget. And recently, it was made clear to me that we had some issues with the funding that we had left over after the winter. So I'm here to request $50,000 to assist us in meeting our bills till the end of the year.
Okay. All right. Questions? Okay. Before, just to hold on that, any questions or discussion? Just to be sure.
Yeah, I'm not clear on exactly where.
You want to speak into the mic? I'm going to echo Mr. Atherton.
I'm not clear on exactly what it's going to be used for. Professional services.
There are a number of line items that are currently overspent. They are mostly the repair and maintenance line items, vehicles, equipment, grounds, and buildings. So it will be for repayment of expenses that we have incurred.
John, then.
had alluded to the fact that this was really a temporary situation.
As we come to the end of the fiscal year, we have not hired the seasonal staff, and we have had some vacancies that we may have some labor funds available. And as I said, as we get closer to the end of the year, we may be able to make a transfer.
Jim?
As I understand, this is like unpaid bills?
Yes.
Okay. So my other comment as to what you just said is, I personally, I don't know your business, but I'd hate to have you try to balance this unintended consequence by not providing service, when you just said we're not going to fill certain seasonal positions.
No, we have already not. We haven't been able to hire the number of seasonal employees either last summer or this summer that we have budgeted. We have, I believe, 9 budgeted, and typically, last year we had 6, this year we have 6. So there's a gap there.
Okay.
And then we had a vacancy that went unfilled for most of the year. So that's where those funds are being generated.
Okay. Tim? I'm sorry, Tim? Yeah.
Kara, the only question I have is this, I understand the need and I support the transfer, but it seems like this number got up pretty high without detection. And I was just curious if you could comment on how that got away from us a little bit.
We recently had a clerical, we had one person leave and another person leave, and it wasn't until I started taking care of the bills that it became clear.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Atherton? I'm not sure. Does it? Okay. There you go.
Just trying to follow my own admonition about the mics. But just, I don't have a comment on this, but I did want to start, as you're going through the reserve requests, I noticed they add up to a fair amount of money. And the schedule I saw, you came down to, 188 at the end. I want to mention one that's not on your docket today that may or may not materialize, so you have it in your thoughts as you go forward. The town has been requested by Family and Children's Services. It's been well reported in the newspapers, the difficulties of that organization. There are a lot of moving parts in their request to us that may or may not come to fruition. I, and I believe other members of the board, feel this is a very important community issue. And I'm not, as I say, I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but the request was for up to $300,000. I don't think that's where we're headed here, because there are a lot of different people who have to participate. But I think there is an amount that we may well come back to you to ask, and it could happen before the end of the fiscal year. So the number I would use as a round number for you to think about making available if necessary is up to $100,000. It may not materialize, but I just wouldn't want to see the reserve fund disappear before what, as I say, I think is a community issue and of just a high level of community importance.
Well, why don't we talk about that? Oh, well, go ahead, Jim, then I'll make a comment.
I just echo Mr. Atherton's comment, and I'm not I'm kind of peripheral to this in the discussions at the hospital, but we have some people there that are also on the board there who say their cash position is, months, 60 days, or some very small. So it's a very vital community service. So I think it's something that we have to be thinking about.
Why don't, just for information purposes, let me give you, and I will get this out to you so you can see it afterwards, an overview of the reserve fund right now. As of today, the reserve fund has $725,000 in it. If you may recall that there was a transfer from Article 6 at this town meeting of $225,000. So, as it stands. Now, we've already approved requests of $20,000 for the professional services for townwide wage and comprehensive study, and a recruitment of a finance director of $30,000. So, how can that be?
So I apologize.
Yeah, I know.
It's
Look
sent
at this.
revised one.
That's
I don't know
okay,
whether
but
it's-
that's okay. We'll talk about it later. So anyway, so we're down to 675,000. I'm like, that's not right. Now, and we have some impending requests today. Kara gave a presentation for $50,000 for the Department of Public Works. You'll hear from Chief Pittman soon for a request for $21,905 for vests. And Bob Gardner and Heidi Holgate are here to talk about a request from Sconset Water for an appropriation deficit of $145,000. In addition to that, on the horizon, there is a potential request for the Health Insurance Trust Fund for $250,000. And assuming that all those get approval, I just said, and Martin, I'm going to look at you again, make sure the math is correct, that there'll be $238,095 minus 50?
Yes.
Okay, so
it's
there'll be $188,000.
$188,000.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, so roughly $188,000 left after. And so that will go into deliberations for any potential requests from Family Services and any other. Okay? John?
This is just an observation. In the years that I've been on this committee,
Uh-huh.
we might have one or two requests for the whole year,
Sometimes.
and there's all of a sudden, we're getting bombarded, in my view, with quite a list.
Well-
I'm just wondering, is this just coincidental, or?
I'm not sure. I'll speak just from, and Tim has been on for a while, and Jim, too, is that there are some years that the reserve fund is down to zero at the end of the fiscal year. And there are some that are quieter. So I'm not sure that
I'm talking about the dollar amount, I'm talking about the number of
requests.
requests.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure that there is anything more than just some years are different than others. And I can't say for sure. I do know that, you just heard this from Kara, this is a unforeseen expense and hopefully once in a lifetime concern. The Health Insurance Trust Fund is something that, and again, I'm looking out to Mr. Atherton, my recollection is that some of the auditors are recommending to augment that fund a little bit. And so that's also a unique situation we don't face every year.
Right, I think the auditors and others would like to have a certain level of reserves in the fund at the end of the year to cover a certain
Right, well, that's my
estimated
understanding.
months, but it may turn out that, there might be some flexibility in the end there, so that's one item you might consider holding action on. The auditor, it's helpful to give us advice here, but it's not often absolutely necessary if there are other priorities, so that's something for you to think.
Could be. And then the purchase of the vest for the police department, that's something that Chief Pittman had discussed with us previously. And then, the Sconset Water. That's also a unique situation, which we can find out a little bit more of. So, answer your question, John. See, from my understanding, I don't see this as anything more unusual. If you average out over the number of years, and I'll go for 8 years, that's my experience. And I don't know if anyone else would like to jump in on that, but that's my opinion.
Must be my imagination.
No, not at all. I don't think so. So, and as I said before, I'm going to double check with Martin. I will send out the be sure you have the status of the reserve fund after today. Okay? So, Craig.
Just from my own knowledge, so these pending requests are there because they didn't get into the budget cycle last year? Is that
Well, you could. I don't see it that way. But my feeling on a reserve fund request is an unforeseen expense. And let's just look at the Public Works request. Is that something that was certainly unforeseen for a number of reasons? And so being that, directly to your question, is that at the time the budget was made for fiscal year 2015, this was not even a blip on the horizon. Okay, does that help from that standpoint.
Yes.
As for the health insurance trust fund, let's just look at that, just assuming, again, that's a potential that's there. That is at the behest of the auditors for reserve, which again, it was, they started this past year, so it was after the fiscal year set started. I think going forward in something like that, then yes, that should be budgeted ahead of time.
And that item, the health insurance trust, that's not OPEB that we voted.
No,
at
no,
the
no.
town meeting.
That's something different. That's something different.
Thank you.
That's something different. So I don't know if that helps answer your question. I'm trying to answer it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Further discussion. Now, going back to Jim, you were going to make a motion for something?
Yes.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the DPW request for $50,000. Is there a second?
Yep.
Okay. Discussion on the motion to approve? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you. The next item is the request from the police department for, if I find it here, $21,905 for the purchase of bulletproof vests. Is that correct? Yeah, Chief, and thank you for coming, and you can just elaborate on that for us?
Yes, thank you. On the request form, there's actually too much written there. You can stop after it says vests, and the rest of that shouldn't be there. That was an error, clerical error.
Oh, that Aries 3 and all that?
Yeah, from
Okay.
there on, that's
Okay.
not included in this.
Okay.
These vests are the special vests that are used by the tactical team for entries, high-risk warrant service, things like that. They're different than the normal vests that a police officer wears. Normal vests cost $1,200. They wear them under their clothes. We budget $5,000 a year to replace 5 of those. Actually, we replaced 2 or 3 because they've expired, and the other 2 or 3 are new issues to new hires that we have each year. When we put together our vest replacement plan, they're good for about 10 years. I think it's 10 years when they expire. When we put together the plan, we totally overlooked the tactical vest for the SWAT team, and it just came to our attention this year when we found out that the ones they're wearing had expired in, I think, 2009, which that's pushing the envelope a little bit on that.
Okay. Questions? Discussion? Tim?
I would just say this isn't a surprise. I think we talked about this.
We did. That's true. When you came before.
Support it, yeah.
Okay. Further comments? Okay, hearing none, I would ask for a motion.
Move approval.
So we have a motion to approve.
Second.
There's a second. Okay, there's a second. Discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. And then, thank you. Have a good afternoon. Our last request is from the Sconset Water Enterprise Funds, and it is there's actually, the total is $145,000, but it's broken down into debt service and into insurance premium. Do I got that right, Bob?
That's correct.
Okay. And Bob, thank you for coming, and the
Thank
floor
you
is yours.
for the opportunity.
Anytime.
If you'll recall, back up just a little bit to the November special town meeting. At the November special town meeting, in order to certify the tax rate, DOR required that Sconset adjust their revenues and their budget. That was done and voted on. That budget the DOR required is $2,000 less than the debt service for the year. You don't have to be a math major to figure out there's going to be a problem. And that's where we're at now. So the DOR, recent DOR handling of enterprise budgets needs to be, continue to be addressed with them to at least get them to recognize the seasonality of Nantucket's water supplies and perhaps put some margin in on a 5-year rolling average. So we had we had the DOR issue, and then this year Sconset's demand one rate was less than flat. There are 800 accounts in Sconset, and during the winter, just over 100 have consumption at all, of any. And what happened in Sconset was that they make all their money in the fall, the first part of the fiscal year. And even that was off this year. So we're in this situation. The commission has taken some steps to address this in the future. They've done the rate increase on May 1st, took effect in May 1st. The negotiations with Verizon are concluded, and we'll be receiving revenue from them over the next 20 years. It'll averages $63,000 a year. The other factor that came into play was that the sale of the land on 33 New Street has now gone to bid twice with no takers. So the commission is a little baffled by that. It's a 7,500-acre lot with water views in the middle of Sconset. You'd think it'd be worth $1 million.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah. So, a number of events have come into play here. The Sconset Commission has directed us, or we recommended to them that the only expenses for the rest of the year we'll be dealing with are a small debt service payment, $1,000, mandatory water sampling cost, billing costs, and some electricity. So we put the brakes on expenses early on when we realized this trend. The other small deficit is in the retirees' health insurance premiums that after the budget was adopted, there was an adjustment. So that's where we're at.
Okay. I'll start up with a question. I know, Bob, we had chatted a little bit already, but I'll repeat what I had said. My concern from a financial standpoint is the future, is how do we avoid...
Yeah, it's our plan, and we've been talking, Heidi and I, that as we develop the budget for FY16, then it's our intent to come back to this Finance Committee with a plan on how we're going to, one, deal with DOR in the future, and two, it's our intent to repay this amount to the reserve fund.
Okay. Well, and specifically,
the third thing is, we'll do whatever we have to do not to come back here again. That's not my favorite thing.
And the only thing I would add, again, we just chatted before, I think that, again, revisiting the idea of combining both water companies to make your life a little easier.
Yeah, that's coming back on the table. Preliminary discussions have started again, picked up where we left off with enabling legislation was drafted by Koppelman and Page. The commission reviewed that, had a couple of little issues, and then it kind of got pushed to the back burner. But it's more than time to bring that forward. It's not efficient to have two separate enterprise accounts like this, particularly when one doesn't have employees. Sconset is a pump station. Let's be clear about that. It's a pump station. And with the capital work that's been done out there this year with the new pump station in Skated, not only is it more efficient, but it's now all controlled from Wanakama. Better electrical controls. The 1960 stuff is gone. Redundancy. Complies with all the latest chemical handling procedures, and should be, Sconset expenses are going to be medical costs for the retirees, and electricity, and a little chemicals, some debt service. That's Sconset's budget.
Jim?
Maybe a question for Martin, but does paying this out of the reserve fund help get this money into the base for the DOR budget process for the next year?
Well, It doesn't, in effect, because they're not going to count this as a revenue. Last year, what happened, if you remember, there was a $278,000 from the reserve account done to eliminate a revenue shortfall potentially for Wisconsin Water. So what happens in the budget process, DOR took this money away because they're not a revenue that's expected. It's considered a subsidy.
So that's right, they certify the revenue, not the expense.
So in a way, no, they're not going to count this towards their revenues for next year.
Further, Cliff?
The other component, I'm sorry, just wanted to mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other component that's happening that's going to help us in Sconset is that the debt has been retired on the meter program. You know, that was a big project for Sconset, well worth it, but for some little quirk in state law, all meter projects can only be bonded for 10 years. You can do pipeline for 20, but meters, the max is 10 years. So, boy, that it's a pretty big bite on a small system like that to be able to do that. So, but that has been retired. So that's going to be another help.
When it comes to the DOI, we met with him, I think, a year or 2 years ago, and he seemed very cooperative. If you could show what you were doing, he was more than willing to help out. Do you find that that's true, or was he just playing us?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's still a moving target, isn't it?
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Dave-
I move
oh,
approval.
oh, David had a comment, then go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, Bob, do you think your expenses are going to match up with the revenues that are going to come in on the rates for Sconset? Or is this sort of a perpetual situation where the folks in Sconset are basically underpaying for the service that they're getting?
David, I don't think it's perpetual. I think there are a few things here that are in play that need to settle out. One huge one is the final accounting of the USDA grant to Sconset, which is $1.2 million. That as soon as the pump station project is completed, then we do the final accounting on that. They'll make a determination what the final payment is to Sconset. But of that $1.2 million, $635,000 and change is an outright grant. That's a game changer for something like Sconset. So that's why I said when we come back with the FY16 budget, we're going to have a pretty detailed plan for Sconset.
I seem to recall you said about 50% of the revenues come in through watering. Going forward, wouldn't it be prudent to perhaps balance your expenses to less revenue from watering?
If there a way to do that, perhaps. The commission has two choices.
Well, I mean, the commission's forcing you to do it right now because they're not going to yeah.
When it comes to revenues, you have the service charge, which is $35 a month in Sconset, and it's easy to increase that, and you know you're going to get that revenue to pay for a certain percent of your expenses. The commission is not willing to do that. They are kind of dug in on the service charge as high as it's going to go. But they did raise the water rate, hoping to take advantage of that higher consumption starting now and give them a little cushion going into the next fiscal year. It's I think we're going to, there's another factor that comes into play with water revenues for people that are on sewer. We are seeing deduct meters go out the door. You can't keep them in stock. People that are on water and sewer are putting the deduct meter in so they don't have to pay sewer on the irrigation, and they're irrigating more. It's a plus for us, not so good, not so much for Carroll, but it's a different system. It's a different system out there.
What's the service charge for in-town water?
$15. $19.50 a month.
A month, so
And
that's
it's $19.50 a month.
$250 a year,
Yeah,
roughly.
Yeah.
And Sconset's doing $35.
a month.
And do they pay for any of your time?
Yes.
Your time?
Yeah, there's a management contract. the Sconset Water Commission pays, want to comment, $80,000 a year. My time, Heidi's time, the billing time. As I say, they have no employees anymore, and really, it's time to, as Matt, it's time to really get serious about merging and being able to make it a little more efficient with, particularly with reporting to the state. You know, you do the same report 3 times, and it just, it's time. There's not a, the players have changed, you know. It's not such a big turf deal anymore. The employees, there are no employees in Sconset, so I think they're committed to doing that.
Okay. All right. Jim?
But, yeah,
So I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Okay. A motion to, is there a second? Thank you. All right. And so the motion to approve $145,000 for the Sconset Water Enterprise Fund. Comments on the motion, discussion? Okay. Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carried. Bob, thank you.
Thank you for time.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. We'll see you this summer. All right, very good. So that concludes that. Next item is item 9, and this was added for discussion on and report on National Grid late fees that are paid by the town. And you received an email on Tuesday, the 13th, and from Martin, it spelled out these charges. Barton, I'm going to ask you, if would you mind, before discussing it, if you could just give an overview for what you sent out? I mean, I looked at it and tried to figure it out, and I never know. So I think I understand, but I really don't. Anyway, you can explain what you sent out, just so we have an idea.
I apologize for the small font, actually.
That's okay.
Basically, what we got from Lauren, she provided this report. This report shows all the charges, including up to a penny if you scroll further down. And it shows the only accounts that are included with names is the top 20 accounts, because those are about 95% of the late charges.
Okay.
If needed, this report can be expanded to include all the accounts, including the one with the 1 penny charge. So that can be done as well. And she did send me, I'm sorry.
No,
Yes.
go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
She did send me later on Tuesday a master account sheet that she uses. And I apologize, but I haven't had the time to fill these account names in.
Okay.
But if needed, again, I can do that and forward it to the committee with a complete set names of the accounts. As you see from the report, most of the late charges come from to name a few, Nantucket Memorial Airport, the school, and then there is all sorts of different accounts that are listed, and the amounts get smaller and smaller as we go down. Mm-hmm. It's nothing close to the numbers that were being circulated in the press. And also, yes, and I mean, this covers a period of a year and a half, maybe.
Okay.
So, if you have any questions, I mean, I can answer them to the best of my ability again.
Well, that's fine. I think that certainly, we appreciate getting that information, because just to let everyone know, I actually called Martin on Tuesday morning with this request, and so you're getting it together that soon. Thank you for doing that. So I'll open it up for comments or questions on that. David?
Yeah, Martin, is this a function of the fact that the invoices and bills just aren't getting into our payment system on time? I mean, we're not talking about a lot of money, but it seems like...
It's more of a function of the system of the way we pay bills through the AP warrants, and it very much depends, the payment cycle depends on when there are meetings and AP warrants are approved, I think. We are given a longer period of time to pay them for a town. I believe ours is 47 days, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sorry, 47.
47, that's what I mean, it's 40, I thought it's 45, but I was correct, I might be wrong on that, so. But again, it's just the cycle of the AP warrants, I would think.
And
I don't
how
pay-
long is that cycle? I mean, it's...
Well, the bills, the bills arrive and they go through the whole process of including the PO and stamping. Again, this would be more of a question for people that pay these amounts, these accounts. And I mean, we can do a research and ask people to come and present as to.
It's a small number. I'm just surprised that, either we, negotiate out extended terms so that we don't get late charges, maybe paid in 60 instead of whatever the requirement, or, getting the warrants so that they fit within the schedule, so that, it's a small amount of money, but it just curious more why.
It can be avoided, definitely, yes.
I think the goal would be to follow what you're saying, is to see if we can negotiate to get that number down to zero.
Yes.
That's the goal.
That is the goal, absolutely. And also, a lot of departments, and I'm not talking in anybody in specific, but there is one person in charge of these things, and so if there is an extended unexpected leave for a reason, invoices might accumulate. So that might have been a reason as well.
Well, it looks like they did it very well in November of 2012. We didn't miss a single bill. Looks like that one month we didn't pay one charge, but every other month there's like at least 10 that we paid back. I don't know who was working that month.
I don't know. Again, as for more detailed questions, I don't deal with invoices, and in our department, Cathy is the one that pays for the town. So I can have more questions and to people who are in charge. I don't know how to answer that, especially going back to 2012.
Carrie, do you want to add something? Thank you.
I have to say that DPW is not one of the ones that has a lot of late charges, but we get approximately 20 electric bills a month because of all the sewer pump stations we have and the different facilities and so forth. And the electric company takes the address that is given to them when the account is first set up. So of our 20-some-odd bills, 3 or 4 of them go down to Broad Street. Some of them go to the sewer treatment plant, and some of them go to DPW. So we have to gather all those together to send them in. So when it comes time to paying the bills, it's not always, it doesn't always make it to the desk of the person who does the payment immediately. So there's a little transit issue going on in some cases.
Couldn't we do a change of address?
I was just about to say that.
Do it all.
That's one of the goals.
Dealing with the electric company is not the easiest thing.
Wow.
That's all I'll say.
This is quite fascinating to hear this, the inner workings.
I also just wanted to specify that lately we have been working towards centralizing more of those. So when I said Cathy Richard from our department handles, she handles for the most part of the town. She helps enterprise funds as well if needed. So she's we've tried to consolidate around several people.
Let me ask this question. This is more of a bigger picture, because this might be touching on one aspect of, I would think this is one example of where more efficiency can be achieved, and again, with the new finance director coming on and a coordinated effort, is that this could be, among others, a goal or a project that the town can do better at. And it sounds like I think there are options there. John?
This is interesting. This whole area is an interesting topic. I know when I was working, we negotiated early payment discounts. And the reason we did it was the discount was important, but not terribly important. But we felt it forced us to become a heck of a lot more efficient about how we managed our whole process of payments and so forth. And we were successful in probably 90-some% of all of our vendors gave us an early payment discount. And it's kind of it's an interesting way of looking at it. I know that from my perspective, I looked at it as simply a way of kind of incentivizing our whole corporation to be a lot more efficient about how we handled it. And that had some real upsides in a lot of different areas.
Jim?
Can't help not make a comment. So, the burden of paying things, I mean, the accounts payable function is pretty routine, pretty automated. I mean, I don't know about here, but really the burden of making sure that the invoice is correct, that it's, you've got the item, that really is on the manager of the local. I'm not sure about how, and it's, and I know that I work hard to make sure that that timeliness and accuracy is part of the accounts payable function. And if you don't get that right, it's just like payroll. You have to get that right too. So it's very much about discipline where I am, and something that is, I think, is a symptom. I'm not making a judgment about the town or anything, but it's a symptom of sound financial practices.
Facilities has been one thing that's been difficult because the utilities especially are paid, right now, are paid by the individual buildings. And with the implementation of the facilities management division of DPW, I'll commit to looking at trying to gather that together so that we don't have.
I wasn't commenting on your department.
No. And the AP process here is a 2-week process, so there should be plenty of time. But Lauren Sinatra has just received a grant for working with the town for another year, and one of the items that she will be addressing is to have some way to incentivize electric savings. I think the thought originally was that if the individual occupants of the building paid the bill, that they would pay attention to how much they used. But I think Lauren is going to take that from a different angle and try to create some incentive for that.
Good. Okay. Further comment? Oh, Steve.
I guess the last comment on this is that it's not about this number here, this $2,800, and it's not about National Grid.
Okay.
But it's a larger point. If this is happening here in this one account that we looked into, because there were reports of much higher numbers in these late charges, but if we did this, if we asked for the same report in all accounts, what would we find? I mean, we just had a request at this meeting for $50,000 for bills that had accrued over time, and we didn't find them until we cleared the paperwork off the desks of 2 people who just left. I mean, so how much inefficiency is there, and how do we stamp it out before it becomes a bigger problem, I guess?
Your point is well taken. Tim?
Well, I agree, Steve. I think it's symptomatic of potentially a bigger concern. And I think we all know, sitting at this table, that we've had 2 finance directors in the last 4 or 5 years. We've never seemed to get a full staff in place, and by the time we do, it's already changed because someone's left at a key position. So I hope that the group that's working hard to replace the finance director, that we can finally get some continuity and start to address, because there is a concern and a comfort level, I think, that all of us have, that maybe we can get some comfort finally now. And Martin, I just would echo, Mr. Chairman, the job you did. I mean, it seemed, Jim, I remember distinctly when we were all here and we were thanking Irene, not to bring up someone who's not here anymore, but we were thanking her for a great job, and within a month she was gone, and we had no idea what was going on. So, I mean, symptomatic of the Finance Committee being a little in the dark and some of the things that are going on with late fees. I mean, it's just very difficult to manage this way. So, thanks for what you do.
So don't take my thanks as a portent of future matters.
No, it's
Don't worry.
It's been. I honestly.
Illustrated picture.
Thank you, but I also have to specify it's been a very much of a joint effort of the whole finance department that has come together. So everybody has helped and has been included in the whole budget process also. And Deb Dewart has done an amazing job as an interim finance director. So there's a lot of people to thank.
Good job done. More to come. Thank you. Okay. All right. Any other comments on late fees for National Grid? Okay. And next item is discussion of the Finance Committee goals going forward, and we had, there was a discussion earlier about changing how we meet, and I think that we can, and also a discussion about the transparency, I'll call it, within this committee. So we'll go back to, we can start with that, or we can talk about any goals that members may have going forward. Open the floor. David.
Yeah, let me address the transparency issue that Cliff raised. I was, specifically as it relates to Sherburne Commons, I was not functioning as a Finance Committee member when I was involved with that. I was doing it at the request of the Board of Selectmen, and our chairman of the board is here. All of those discussions took place in executive session, so the issue, is from my perspective, I was not there on the committee as a Finance Committee representative. The board did not ask for somebody from the Finance Committee, and so it was never, I never felt that it was appropriate. I couldn't, as a matter of fact, because of the executive session requirements, come and discuss in an open meeting what was going on as related to Sherburne Commons. So, so that's my that's what I have to say on Sherburne Commons.
I'm going to make a comment first before I recognize it. The Board of Selectmen certainly at their discretion can pick and ask who they want to, and I have no qualms with that. As my role as chairman, as I represent this committee, I'm one of 9, no more, no less. And from my perspective, this issue was an embarrassment for me, because when twice, and I didn't share this with anyone till now, but until twice this year, Sherburne Commons made the front page of the paper, and congratulations for that. But when your name was mentioned, it had Finance Committee member. And both times that the paper came out, I received 3 calls each time. And all of them were the tone of, what's the Finance Committee have to do with this? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Well, one of your members is a Finance Committee member. Why don't you know what your members are doing? I said, I don't. And each time. So my concern is that the board is certainly, as can do it, can feel as they want and pick who they want, but it makes it very difficult when this committee has a member on a committee that we're not aware of. And I find it striking that a few years ago, my first year as chairman, I was asked to advise another committee member who is on another committee to pick and choose, and he did. And so from my standpoint, I like I said, I've kept quiet, but I think that the Finance Committee is different. And I think that if a member is going to be on another committee, I personally feel that we should pick that member. So, Rick, go on ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I hear you, Mr. Chairman, and I will just say for the record what Mr. Worth said was absolutely correct. We reached into the community for someone we felt had the skills necessary for the activity. In terms of executive session, Cliff, I'd be happy to respond to you. Once we cleared the executive committee issue, the board chose to release all the minutes. They were public record at that point. Before that, I am precluded from speaking to any one of you on this issue, whether you're running for selectman or not. And I think when any one of you joins the board, Tim has the direct experience. That's the rule, and that's what you follow. So we can choose to reach out if the board wants to, and bring one or more of you in on any subject. But that means that you are then responsible for the same privilege and cannot speak to anybody else. My experience dealing with the Finance Committee since I've left you and I've been a member of the board is when you expand executive committee issues from 5 to 14, the odds are not good. And so I'm often extremely reluctant to do that with all of you. If you do it with one, then the question is whether that person has to talk to the rest, and so on. So it's a difficult subject, so I just want to respond to you in that regard. You know, I'm familiar going around to organizations and having to respond when you don't know anything. Even being on the board, there are things we don't know about either when they ask us. So it's not always so easy when you're running for office.
Thank you. Cliff?
I was just trying to elaborate on, I guess, the past years where I think we've done a good job where we're now coming up with a 5, 10, 20-year, whatever, capital program view of the town and just different things. And as Mr. Worth said, going to these annual meetings where the selectmen, the finance committee, and everybody's just on the same page, whether we're aware of the executive session actual information, just the knowledge of this is what's going on and this is where we're headed and this is what we're trying to achieve, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
Also, thank you. David?
Yeah, just for the record, I never identified myself to the newspaper as being on the FinCom. I mean, obviously, it's well-known, but I did not identify myself as representing the FinCom. That was purely their characterization. It's not something that I can do anything about. So, I mean, at least I felt I knew what my boundaries were, given the charge that I'd been given by the selectmen. So.
Okay. Here we are. Further comments? Tim?
Well, I think but it goes a little bit further than that. I think it's indicative of a problem that we've struggled with all year. And I think back to a very early meeting of the Finance Committee where we were asked to pick a member to work on the Island Home Committee. And right out of the chute, Dave, you said that you were that member, and we hadn't voted you the member. We, as a matter of fact, at that meeting voted Jim our member. So, I mean, the perception of, and I can't speak to what was said to Cliff over at Sherburne Commons, and I don't know where they got their information from, but, you know, we always had a great team approach here, and I feel like we've lost a little bit of ground this year in that respect. The chairman, as he said, has had things happen he had no knowledge of. We have different things that the committee has voted, and the committee doesn't seem to support the majority in some cases. We have minority views that run. And I just, I would love to talk about it at a point or today or further discussion so that maybe going forward we can talk about issues of transparency, because I know we talk about streamlining and Saturday, but I've actually felt that we haven't had enough time. And I think that the waste options contract is a great example of that. I think that Craig's issue of looking into the 401k plan and offering an alternative. I mean, the amendment came up the last day of the meeting, and we talked about it at the town meeting, and we spent zero time on it as a committee talking about the pros and cons of that proposal. So I mean, when we talk about transparency, I think part of that, from my concern, is time to look at things with the amount of due diligence that's necessary. And I think there's a lot of things that we haven't had time to dig into, and that's one of my big concerns, that we get going so fast that we don't look at things the way we used to. So I'll just leave it at that.
Good. Further comments? Greg?
I guess to tag on to what Tim was saying, and this gets to goals for the next year for this committee. I guess I would see it, and I don't have the hindsight that you would have, Tim, that you've been on this committee for a lot longer than I did, and just been involved in politics on Nantucket. But I would like to see the Finance Committee more proactive, and I guess through you, Mr. Chairman, we could ask the chair of the Board of Selectmen, would you be, speaking for the board, would that be something that you would look forward to have more input from the FinCom as far as, let's say, OPEB, let's say compensation, let's say with the wage and benefit study coming up, that it's going to go beyond the Personnel Review Committee. I look at the FinCom is an important committee to advise the Board of Selectmen, that, we might come up with some important information or, perhaps things to consider on the board level. Just wondering if that would be something that would be appreciated by the Board of Selectmen.
I think I will say that, and I certainly have some responsibility here, in terms of the waste options contract, I think it would have benefited us all if everybody had more time, including you folks. No question about that. So Cliff, I agree totally with that. There are a lot of reasons for that, but anyway. There are other subjects that might be helpful to have more discussions. I know I had a conversation with one of you and suggested maybe the chair and the vice chair of the board and the FinCom meet not in an open committee session, but let's say 2-on-2 privately, and have a way to explore issues where common interests might be discussed more openly and come back to each committee. So that might be helpful. In terms of something like the Personnel Committee, that's a committee that has to learn how to function more than it has. And committees, I think, earn their own respect by the folks who participate and deal with the issues. So that one, I think, we all recognize is kind of language. We have to figure out what to do about that specifically. And if there are other issues on your mind, I think it's helpful you also bring them up to us. You as a group can say, I'm interested in X, Y, Z. You can draft a memo to the board, have a majority of you that agree on that. In terms of what our board, I can only speak today as an individual. So I think the board would be receptive to that, but it has to act as a board.
Thank you. Tim?
I think that, Greg, you got me thinking as you looked at the audience. It reminded me of the way we started our meeting out today. We started our meeting out today by a citizen coming forward and saying that she appreciated the comment the Finance Committee put in Article 48. And she was hoping that the thoughtful and in-depth analysis of Article 48 would lead to thoughtful considerations in a whole variety of ways. And so that's a great example of how I think the public appreciates the way we do things. And I would hate to put our foot on the gas and streamline it to the point where we're not doing that. Because I almost think that we're going too fast now. There's lots of things that at one point or another John has said or Dave has said that we'd like to dig into, and the calendar just doesn't allow us to. So I just want us all to be very mindful of that as we talk about how to move forward.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
So, good comments, Tim. Don't misunderstand or I'm not suggesting that we streamline this so that, we come once and we've done all 110 articles. Although that might, some days that's not a bad idea. What I'm really focused on as I've thought about this is how do we dispatch the stuff that just because we have it scheduled, we have time, we tend to fill up the airwaves with things that may not be as impactful as they, and if we were to take some of those activities, group them together, and the things that I had in mind were hearing basically the budgets in a very programmed fashion. So, I'm coming from that in the way that we did them in the private side, but it doesn't need to be the model. But that we dealt with those kinds of things in a pretty, you got a half an hour or whatever the amount of time that we allot to hear things like budget, so that we actually can take a good amount of time to talk about OPEB and to dig and those kinds of things. Because I think there are a lot of, there are a lot of good ideas that get surfaced here and we talk about, but we really don't have the time to dig into them because, we perhaps haven't streamlined and cut out some of the, or re-looked at how we might take up things that really don't add a lot of value for us to regurgitate and go over and get ourselves a lot of time. And we did, Matt, we did a great job this year, less meetings, and I thought some of the things that we did, early on with our public hearings and whatnot really helped us move along. But I think we've got the opportunity to, look at how we can make that process better and get us the time to have the discussions on some of these bigger issues. I mean, I recall sitting, getting the presentation on the capital program, and it was, I thought, for the amount of money that we're talking about and what's out in front of us, that we didn't have a lot of time to talk about that. I'd like to see a lot more time spent on those kinds of things, a lot less time spent on the things that, that we have to cover, but we may be able to do it in a more efficient fashion. So that's where I'm coming. I mean, I'm not, that's, when I think about it, that's how I'm thinking about it, so that we truly can get to some of the things that I think, are all on our minds and we'd all like to, spend more time on.
Jim?
So you weren't suggesting that we give up our weekday meetings, you were suggesting adding some Saturdays to dig into things?
Yeah, and I think that when you start to do that, then you can look at how, we could spend some time talking about this, but you start to do that, and then you start to think about how you might group some things, so that, you then, begin to carve off, we're going to have, a broader amount of time or a larger amount of time to spend on some of the other things. So, and I think that, part of it would be, particularly on the budget stuff, would be the discipline that I think that departments and the enterprise funds need to have when they come and talk about budgets. This was a tough year because we didn't have a finance director, so I don't think we got to certainly, not to the place that I would hope that we would have gotten to, but I think with a new finance director, we have that opportunity to get to a place where the finance department has got some better procedures and approaches. They're in harmony with the kinds of things we would like to see. And the departments also would, have more discipline and more rigor in, that they come better armed, to make their budget presentations than I've seen some of them come in the past. So.
John?
The discussion has made me think about a couple of things that's bothered me about, and I don't know if you call it streamlining, or I don't call it streamlining. I think sometimes we look at the wrong end of the horse, Just, we're spending a lot of time on things, and I'm sitting there saying, but that's only some of the stuff is, I don't want to use the word trivial, but it basically is. I would ask this group, I was on a capital program committee, and we spent one heck of a lot of time talking about big projects for the future. Not necessarily the stuff that's going to be in the budget, but stuff that's going to be out 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years. Because it was appropriate to talk about some of that stuff today, because you start to lay the groundwork for what do we have to know about this. When we brought, when the superintendent of schools came in and started talking about, in a very loose way, quite frankly, I may need a school edition. We looked at him and said, wow, let's talk about that. Because the first time I'd ever heard of it, was then. So we got into a fairly protracted discussion with him. How much time did this group here talk about? Well, we didn't talk about it because it's next year. It's not this year. So what's going to happen next year is we're going to get a ton of stuff coming at us that we haven't even dealt with. It's going to be like, and I can see it coming. I can smell it. How much time did we spend on a new firehouse? Tim did because he's on a committee, but I mean the rest of us. And how much time did we spend on option and discussing options around sewers? And these are the boulders that are sitting out there, and we don't, now maybe it's part of the problem is maybe we shouldn't be doing it. Maybe all we need to do is talk about the budget. But see, I have a problem with the term budget. Because budget says each year you look at a budget and you deal with a one-year budget. Nothing occurs in one-year increments, quite frankly. For the rest of the case.
Okay. Any other comments? Oh, Tim. sorry.
Well, I won't belabor it, but I agree, and I'll just give one little analogy that I think is an unintended consequence of not having the time to dig into this, and it was here today. We had Bob Gardner in with a revenue shortfall in Wisconsin. And it's for a variety of reasons, but as he said, one of the biggest ones is the sewer rates are impacting the water rates because people are putting deduct meters in because they don't want to have to pay a sewer charge on water that's going on their vegetables or their grass. That same problem has plagued us in town, and it's all because we kind of gave a rush job without thinking through the sewer rates, and it's come back to hurt us in many ways. And we're trying to get our hands around that, but lots of other things are slowing down the progress. So I just, that's a great analogy of if we don't take the time here, and I think the Finance Committee has, and I think back to when Rick was on the Finance Committee and his colleagues, they took the time to look into things, and I was thinking when John was talking, Rick, about the Capital Committee, the Finance Committee actually used to have its own subcommittee that would vet the Capital Committee's report to make sure. So, I mean, we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. And so I think we should talk about it.
Well, it's a matter of managing, it's a matter of managing what, what is the priority of our meeting plan? And are we really working on the most important things and giving enough time to the most important things, and how do we prioritize that? I've had an uneasy feeling from day one on the whole area of that type of thing. Are we really working on the most important things? I personally don't think we are.
Well, just to follow up with that, is that here's something we can do as a committee, and we can express our concerns about the, I'll use lack of priority, is that fair?
Yeah, or certainly I think yeah.
Well, let me just finish my thought, then I'll bring it back to you, is that we can draft a letter to the selectmen with our concerns about that, because I've been beating that post for a year.
It seems to me the committee does have time to discuss all these larger issues, but the time is right now. The time isn't November to March when we have the warrant to get through and we have, charter obligations and statute obligations that this committee, has to go through every citizen warrant article about animal litter out of town. We have to spend time on those things, and it takes away time from some of these larger issues. But the time is right now. Well, we don't have to meet once a month, and we don't have to meet 6 weeks from now. We can meet every week if we want to, or we can have, a discussion via email to set an agenda for the next meeting so that we have all of these important topics on a posted agenda, and we can start to delve into them, and we can spend some of this reserve fund that we have access to and hire the consultants that we need. So next year, when the wage and compensation study still isn't in, and when we can say, how are we going to fix that? Well, we'll have time now because we can hire somebody to do that work now. It's going to happen next November that something will have fallen through the cracks, and we won't have any lead time to get all the information and to be able to vet the information to make a recommendation on some important topic to town meeting. But it doesn't have to be every important topic. But, we need to start it now.
Okay. Further comments? But I'll finish up just with the said that if this committee feels strongly about any topic, that we can express our concerns to the selectmen. Anyway. Craig, did you want to say something?
No.
I'm sorry, I thought you had gone. Tim?
I would just say this has been a great discussion in my mind, and I think before we draft a letter, maybe we should all go home, and when we come back to our next meeting, pick this discussion up again and maybe try to crystallize it, and then we can move forward with it, because this is really healthy, I think, for us to talk about things, and you know, I have some more thoughts on, but maybe it's not the right time, but I just throw out the airport for one example. There's a huge issue there. I mean, there's a lot, we could pick any number of things.
Well, before I recognize John, I think that Tim make a good point, and I would even take that a step farther, is that between now and our next meeting, if there are topics that are dear to someone's heart, send that to me, and I will be sure they're on the agenda, so we can talk specifically. John, then David.
Yeah, it seems to me that we have two things, and Steve kind of rattled me up on it a little bit. We have our budget obligations, and that's an obligation. We've got to go through the budget, the yearly budget. We've got to do the warrant articles. These are the things we've got to do. David is saying we should try to do them as streamlined as we can, and I wouldn't argue with that at all. I think there is some space. But I think Steve's got another point, and that is that, you know, maybe it's not our purview, but it seems to me that the problem you have, what impacts your budget so much, is some of the longer-term, larger issues that we aren't dealing with. And then when we are dealing with them, we've got two days to deal with it. You know, something that's been, you know, that's huge. And so it seems to me that we've got to look at maybe how we are functioning. I think we've got the budget process. We can do some things to tweak that and get it better and get it more efficient. But what we don't seem to have a process for is multi-year, long-term projects. We just don't seem to have a process for that. And this group, now, I know the Capital Program Committee has tried to hammer out something with pushing on a long-term plan, but they can only do so much on their own, and that's it. And I think this group there's another process, I think. And how we do that, I'm not quite sure, but I think we have to break it down and say, we've got our budget process, we've got our warrant article process, and we've got the timing of it pretty well nailed down. We can make it more efficient, but it's all designed to go into the town meeting. What we don't have is a process for how do we handle some of the longer-term, large financial issues that are going to impact the budget, some budget, somewhere. And how do we get out in front of it so that it doesn't continue to bite us in the rear end?
Yeah. That's it. David?
Yeah, sort of food for thought, and I'm reluctant to suggest this or throw it out there because it's more work. But the food for thought is: would it make sense if, on some of our bigger departments, you know, we'll pick on the airport, maybe the DPW, that we have a finance committee person sort of assigned to that particular enterprise fund or that particularly large general fund category, or perhaps to the school, so that, you know, the job would be to track them and begin to understand the details more than what you're going to collect in 30 minutes or 45 minutes of presentation in front of a group. You know, I know what I'm saying because I know it's more work. It's basically doing what Rick does when he comes to our meetings, or whomever the selectman representative is. But, you know, that way we might get a better, you know, we might have somebody on our committee who has a better insight as to what's going on rather than, you know, who we trust. So, you know, anyway, food for thought, an idea, but it amps up the requirements. So.
Well, as a committee, we can certainly decide to do that, if the committee feels that way. So that is something that members think about, and so interested, so be it. That's how to do it. Just as a matter of delegating out each department to interested members. Okay. Tim?
I like that idea, but it might be, I don't know if you recall, but it was something that went on here for years. There was...
No, okay. Well, yeah, all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are no new ideas.
No, but it's a good idea, because then you've got kind of a bird dog on each.
How did it work?
Well,
I think it works sometimes very well, and sometimes, depends on the individual, how much time, all of it.
Yeah.
But it can be helpful.
Yeah.
For my time. Okay, good. All right. Any other comments? Oh, Tim?
Food for thought.
Food
No,
for
I
thought.
think that's a,
All right. So why don't we leave it as, for this discussion, is that it will be on the agenda just as written, but if someone has a specific concern or that they'd like to talk about, we will specify that on the agenda. Fair enough?
fair enough.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? I lose the agenda here. Okay, hearing none, and the date of next meeting is to be determined. It won't be that far away, because there is some business at hand. I will coordinate that with the town manager.
What is the date?
No, it's not decided yet. I will coordinate that soon with the town manager. Maybe, probably after Memorial Day.
Mr. Chairman, what day, what's, maybe through you to the chairman, what is the last day that budget transfers can be done? Is it July?
July 15th.
July 15th, okay.
Yeah, July,
Okay.
Martin, July 15th?
Yes.
Yep, July 15th. Okay. So, but we'll meet before then,
Yeah, okay.
We'll meet before then. I'm pretty sure we will. So, but again, though, think about what you'd like to talk about and just send them to me. Good, okay. I think any other business? If not, I'll ask for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay. Thank you. Everybody have a nice evening. All right. All righty. So that's.
I can certainly bring it back up.
Think about that.